Okay, in this section we're going to learn how to do queries, and I'm going to teach you how to create 3 queries that are going to essentially ask questions of the information in our tables. And that's basically what a query is a question. But it can range from a very simple question to a very sophisticated question. And the cool thing about queries is that once you create it, just like a form, it's then a permanent object or tool in your database that you can then use to create reports from and to do calculations without having to reinvent the wheel. So the place where queries are created is under the Create tab up here. And we've already worked on tables and we've already worked on forms, but the queries is right here. But before we create a query from scratch, I want to help to clear up one thing, and that is, what is the difference between queries, filters, and sorting? Okay? And if I open up our table employees, first I'm going to show you what filtering and sorting is, which is something that you do right in your tables, and it's something that you do to kind of get quick answers from your data, but it doesn't produce new answers and new calculations in the way that a query would. But let's look at the filters and sorting real quick so that you know what I'm talking about, so you'll understand the difference. Now if we go up to the Home tab, you're going to see there's this section right here. So the most common way to sort your data is just to sort it by ascending or descending. So if you're selected on one of the fields and you click ascending, it'll be lowest to highest. If you change it to descending, it'll flip from highest to lowest. So you see now our entire table is sorted from the highest employee number down to the lowest. Now if we want to get rid of that, we just click Remove Sort and it'll get rid of that. We can also go right in here and click on the drop down and do the same thing. Okay, and we can click here again to remove it. So let's look at another sort. If we wanted to sort alphabetically by last name, we can use our drop down, sort A to Z, and you'll see we have a nice alphabetical listing here. Or if we wanted to sort it by office ID number, we can do that. And you'll notice when we apply the sorting to this column, it overrides the sorting over here. Okay, so once again, let's remove that. So that's sorting, where you're organizing the information either numerically or alphabetically. Let's look at filtering. Filtering, we're going to actually remove information or hide information based on a certain criteria. So a good example, let's say we wanted to hide all the people from office number 1. We'll do the drop down here and we'll go ahead and click on 1. So that's going to hide this and show all of the other ones. Click OK, and now you see that the office ID number 1 is missing. Let's clear that by clicking here. And an even better example would be the employment status. So we can filter this. If we want to just see the full-time people, then we'll get rid of this and just click on the full-time. Click OK. And now it's just showing our full-time employment people. Now if you quickly wanted to look back and see all of their people again, you can toggle the filter on and off. So that turns the filter off, so now we can see our part-time people again. And then we can just click toggle again, and that'll put our full-time back on. If you want to remove it entirely, you can also just clear the filter here. And it'll put us back to our normal table. Okay, so that's the basics on sorting and filtering. And as you notice though, when we do those, all it does is just kind of rearranges the information here in our table. It's not creating a new tool or a new object that we can use over and over again. Okay, so now let's go and create an actual query where we're going to create a question of our data that will be dynamic as our data changes and will continue to give us valuable answers. So in this query, we're going to create a list of all the employees by city. So as you remember, these office ID numbers all refer to a city in our offices table. Okay, so we're going to create a query that will give us our employees' first name, last name, phone number, and it will organize them all by city. And by having that as a permanent query, if your boss was going to ask you that over and over again, as your employees change, you could just pull up that query and run a report for it, which we're going to look at reports in a little bit, and you could do that with just a couple clicks of the button. So we're going to go to create, and whereas with the form we used the form wizard because it makes creating a form a lot easier for simple forms, for the queries we're not going to use the wizard because it just isn't as valuable as the wizard is in the forms. So we're just going to go straight to the query design and we'll just build this from scratch. Okay, so when we click that, you'll see this kind of strange split screen. We have a blank space up here, which is where we're going to enter the tables that we're going to use information from. And then this down here, I'll move this over, is where we're actually going to structure our queries. And I'll get into all that in a second, but first we have to go to our pop-up here and select the tables that we want to draw from. We want both of these because we're going to get the employee's name and phone number off of there, and we're going to get the office city off of the office table. So we can either double click or we can select it and click add. And then when you're finished, you just click close. And this probably looks familiar to you because this is a little diagram basically of our tables, and you can even see the relationship here that we created in our database tools when we went in and drew the relationship. And this has obviously all the fields in both of the tables, and so this allows us to select anything from this to put into our query. So again, we know that we want the first name, right? So we're going to double click that, and notice how it drops it down into its own column here. We go ahead and click last name, drops it down, and then we want the city where they work. And we can double click it, or we can click it and just drag it down. See, it gives me the little plus sign, and then release it and set it in there like that. Okay, so we're just going to create a really simple one right now, and then in another lecture I'm going to get into all of what these mean, and we're going to learn how to move these and put sorts and criteria in here, and just understand this really well. But for now, just understand that our query is going to be pulling our first name field, our last name field, and our city field out of our tables and displaying them in the query datasheet view. Oh, one thing I forgot was the phone number. So we're going to double click on phone number as well. And notice that the phone number is over here, and I really want it next to the first and last name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little gray bar at the top. See how it highlights it? And then if I get my selector arrow at the top, I can grab it and slide it to the left. And now we have them in the order that we want. Okay, and now for the cities, we want to sort the cities alphabetically. So we're just going to do the drop down here on the sort row, and we're going to click ascending, and that's just going to sort them, make them nice and orderly. And that's really all we need to do for a simple query. Now we can go click on run over here, and you'll see what it brings back looks an awful lot like a table that's been sorted. Well, in reality, this is not a table. This data doesn't really exist here. It exists in our table, but the query is just displaying the results of the questions that we've asked of the data in our table. Okay, so we told it to include the first name, the last name, the phone number, the city, and then we sorted the cities in alphabetical order. So you can see we start with Boise and we go all the way down to Seattle. So now if, for instance, Flo Vance moves to Boise next week and we update that in our table, as soon as that record is changed in that table, this will update. And all we have to do is run this query to have an up-to-date view of the cities that everybody lives in. So you'll notice this still says query 1 up here because we haven't named it, because we've just created it. So let's go into design view again. And you can see we can basically toggle back and forth from design view to datasheet view, a lot like we can do with our tables, right? And of course you can toggle up here too, design view, and we won't get into SQL view. But if we close this, it's going to ask us to save it. We'll say yes, of course. And we're going to name this QRY for query, and then employees by city, using our same naming conventions. Click OK. And now you see we have a new object over in our navigation bar. We have queries as a subheading, and then we have our employees by city query saved over here. Okay, so in our next lecture we're going to create another query that allows us to sort by one individual city, and then I'm going to show you a bunch of additional kind of little tools and tricks to using queries more effectively.